Hey everybody, and welcome back to our series on rhetoric. This is episode 1.5, and I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Bullock, why are you going back and adding an episode to a series that you've already finished? It's already got 6 episodes. Well, I felt that there were some exigent circumstances, and you will understand both what that means, and I will explain those circumstances after the theme song. So it's the spring of 2019, and I'm reading the updated course materials for the AP English Language and Composition class. That's the AP class that I teach. And of course, if the exam is changing, and it is a little bit, I want to be up to date. What is it that I'm supposed to be teaching? And I'm looking, and it says right there, don't worry about teaching your kids the Greek names for the vocabulary. They should just know that authors make choices and they achieve specific effects. And so I'm like, all right, so we don't need to know logos, ethos, pathos, Chronos. No, Chronos is Marvel villain. Sorry. But then I turn a few pages in this new material where they've got some information about the updated exam. And wouldn't you know it, in the question for question number 1 of this new updated exam, not even one of the distractor answer choices, it's literally in the question stem, is the word exigence. So here we are. I am adding an episode to my series on rhetoric to talk about exigence. Just some reminders. Rhetoric is the set of tools that writers or speakers use to make their words more persuasive. And if you're watching this as part of the series for the very first time, then you're going to be learning a lot of those things as you keep going. If you're seeing this content popped up and you're like, I've already watched this series, then you already know about some of those other techniques that writers use to make their writing more persuasive. So here we are at exigence. That's a noun, exigency, a synonym. It's basically it's the same thing. And exigence is the particular set of urgent circumstances that demand a response. If you are familiar with some foreign languages, you might recognize the root of exigence. For example, I'm going to butcher it, but the Spanish exige. I apologize. But that means demand. And so exigence is really all about the demand for a response. You have probably never heard the word exigence or exigency before in your life. That's because normal people don't say that word. However, you may have heard the adjective exigent as in exigent circumstances. This is a thing that comes up a lot, and people say it when they are trying to describe a situation that was out of the ordinary and that required a response that was out of the ordinary. I'm sorry, I'm speeding, officer. Normally I wouldn't do it, but my wife is in labor. I'm under exigent circumstances. So you maybe have heard that, and you can maybe make that connection in your mind. So exigence, how do you spot it and how do you talk about it? There's not one single answer to this, because what is an exigent circumstance for one writer is not an exigent circumstance for another. If you have been taught the SOAPSTone method of close reading, if you haven't, there's a link down below. But if you've been taught that method, you know that one of the rows of SOAPSTone is occasion. The O in the acronym SOAPSTone stands for occasion. And occasion is sometimes the same as exigence, but sometimes not. Occasion is a reasonable shorthand, though, for talking about it, because occasion really does get to the what's happening right now, that this author or the speaker said, I am going to now put this thing out into the world. My ideas, my response to what is happening, it's going out into the world. But occasion can sometimes be a surface level exigence. That often when speakers are responding to a particular moment in time, they're not merely responding to that moment, but they're digging deeper and they're saying, hey, I have your attention right now, but let me talk about something that is bigger and deeper and grander. It is basically impossible to talk about exigence without knowing solidly what a writer's or a speaker's argument actually is. What is the thing that they're really trying to get across to their readers and their listeners? Occasion, you can often tell without understanding fully what it is that the writer is trying to say. And if you're thinking about it in terms of the AP English Language and Composition exam, when you're looking in particular at the rhetorical analysis essay passage, there's usually some introductory information that tells you the occasion. And so you might start to think, well, if they're going to tell me, if they're just going to flat out tell me occasion, then exigence must be something that I have to dig a little deeper for. And to really illustrate that, I want to go to our mentor text for this series on rhetoric, and that is James Baldwin's letter to his nephew that is sometimes called My Dungeon Shook. There is a link to that also down in the description. And I think this is a perfect example of how to differentiate between occasion and exigence. The occasion, the surface level occasion for this letter to Baldwin's nephew is contained quite plainly in the last paragraph, where Baldwin says to his nephew, you and I both know that we are celebrating 100 years of freedom, 100 years too early. And he's speaking about, this is the 100th anniversary. We're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. It took effect July 1st, 1963. And Abraham Lincoln, he signed it during the Civil War, freed all the slaves that were in the remaining Union state. If there are channels out there about history, you can go learn that. But you need to remember that Baldwin's nephew was not his only audience. Because Baldwin, he didn't scrawl out this letter, stuff it in an envelope, and mail it to his nephew, also named James Baldwin. No, he published this in the Progressive magazine. It was later collected in books of his essays. Baldwin had a much wider audience and a much deeper audience than just his own nephew in mind. And so it's worth thinking, if the nominal audience is Baldwin's nephew and the nominal occasion is the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, maybe there is a deeper exigence that goes to that deeper audience. And I think we can find what that is, what that demand is. And this is in a passage from the essay that I talk about in other episodes in this series, because it is just a fantastic piece of writing and lays out quite clearly what Baldwin is trying to say. Try to imagine how you would feel if you woke up one morning to find the sun shivering and all the stars aflame. You would be frightened because it is out of the order of nature. Any upheaval in the universe is terrifying because it so profoundly attacks one's sense of one's own reality. Well, the black man has functioned in the white man's world as a fixed star, as an immovable pillar. And as he moves out of his place, heaven and earth are shaken to their foundations. Think about when Baldwin is writing in 1962. The civil rights movement is in full swing. Dr. King is still alive, still marching, still speaking. The landmark Brown versus the Board of Education case that desegregated schools is less than a decade old. The Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, those haven't even been introduced yet in Congress. But there is this sense among the people of the country, of the United States, that something is happening, that equality is inching its way closer to being a reality. Blacks and African Americans are coming out of Jim Crow segregation and into a world that is somewhat more equal. And I think Baldwin's statement that, we're celebrating 100 Years of Freedom, 100 Years Too Soon, it clearly says that we're not there yet. Equality has not yet been reached. And as I'm recording this in 2019, I would argue that equality still hasn't been reached. But what's happening is that the fixed position that the black man has been in relative to the white man. So if you can imagine the social hierarchy, the political hierarchy, the white man is here and the black man is down here. At this point in American history, the white man is still here, but the black man is moving upward ever slowly toward that level of equality. And this is what Baldwin is talking about when he says to his nephew that the place of the black man has been a fixed star. It doesn't matter what kind of white person you are. You know that you can look at black people and say, at least I know I'm better than them. That is obviously a wrong attitude. I am not advocating this. But Baldwin is saying that in 1962, 1963, that is the attitude of most white Americans. And it's the attitude of a whole lot of white Americans today. But Baldwin says, here we are though. We are in this moment where things are changing. And his overall message to his nephew, if you've read it and if you've seen the other episodes of this series, you know, is that ultimately James Baldwin is asking his nephew and telling his nephew that his nephew has to accept the white man, your countrymen, he says. You have to accept them. It's not about integration. It's not about the civil rights movement. It's about recognizing that the white man has to change, and it's going to take some compassion and some understanding and a lot of patience on the part of African Americans in order for that to happen. So when Baldwin is making this argument, not just to his nephew, but to the world at large, that this is a moment of historical change in the United States. The relative positions of white and black are shifting, and it's going to take some patience and some compassion in order to get through this. That is demanded not by the anniversary of a document, but rather by the world events that are happening around Baldwin at this time. The exigence that lies behind Baldwin's letter to his nephew is not, hey, Lincoln signed a thing. It's, the world is changing. The world that I grew up in, my nephew James, is not going to be the world that you finish growing up in, and you need to be prepared for it. So there we go, episode 1.5 on exigence. When you hear that word, exigence, exigency, know that it means the particular set of circumstances that demand a response. And it's deeper than simply, it's this date, I'm speaking to this crowd, I'm being published in this magazine. It's a lot more than that. It's a lot deeper than that. And I guess another way to think of it or conceptualize it might be presidential inaugural speeches, right? Every president makes one. That's the occasion. You're getting sworn in. But the exigence for each president and each inaugural speech is going to be different because every president is being sworn in at a different moment in time in American history. So maybe that can help you understand a little bit the difference between occasion and exigence. And when you see the word exigence and exigency, you know what it means. You know how to talk about it. You know how to write about it. You know how to respond to questions that include it. So anyway, I'll see you for the next one. So looking at this mentor text, there is something obvious on the surface. Oh, you know what? I don't know where that is.